Mr. Chairman, we've already referred to the dangerous nature of dispersants here today. In many cases, they may be more toxic than the oil itself. There is no scientific evidence that dispersants can be effective in an oil spill of this magnitude, and nobody can guarantee they are safe. Making matters worse, BP notoriously chose the petroleum-based dispersant Corexit, one of the most toxic and least effective on Gulf crude oil, according to the EPA's pre-approved list. So far, over 1.5 million gallons of dispersants have been used in the Gulf. In the meantime, people are getting sick from the dispersants, the oil, or some mixture of the two. In Louisiana alone, the Department of Health reports 162 incidents so far of health complaints related to chemical exposure from the oil spill. 128 from cleanup workers, the rest from the general population. Many of the reported incidents came after exposure not to the oil, but to the dispersants. Several people went to the ER in urgent care, and several have been hospitalized. There is already a name for the illness that plagues many of these workers, toxicant-induced loss of tolerance, or TILT, in which people lose the ability to tolerate exposure to household chemical products, medication, or even food. Several health experts are concerned that this is just the beginning. As many of you know, I have been greatly concerned about the potential health effects from dispersants. I fear we are repeating the same mistakes we made after 9/11 in my district, where thousands of responders and area residents are now sick after the failure of the federal government to provide adequate oversight or enforcement to prevent exposure to toxic chemicals in the air. In the case of the Gulf oil spill, BP is the clearly responsible party. However, it is up to us to ensure that BP is not allowed to evade liability or to shift the cost to the taxpayers for potential health effects. This bill adds human health impacts as recoverable damages. The underlying bill adds human health impacts as recoverable damages under the Oil Pollution Act. This is an important issue, and I thank the Chairman for including the provision in the bill. But we must do everything we can to prevent people from getting sick in the first place. And the law does not deal adequately with the dangers posed by the use of dispersants. Section 311D of the Clean Water Act requires the federal government to determine the amount of dispersant that can be, quote, used safely in the water in response to an oil spill. As far as I can tell, this has never been done. The provisions of Section 311D have been ignored. In fact, EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson has said that the long-term effects of dispersants on aquatic life are unknown, and that the amount we're using in the Gulf is unprecedented. I'm sure the same could also be said of the effects on human health. It seems apparent the EPA did no real analysis before pre-approving these dispersants for the list or before authorizing their use in response to the Gulf oil spill. 5 years ago, the National Academy of Sciences issued a report on the efficacy and effects of oil spill dispersants. It outlined numerous aspects of oil dispersants that are inadequately understood, most notably, quote, the mechanisms of both acute and sublethal toxicity from exposure to dispersed oil. The National Academy of Science report cautioned that, quote, the current understanding of key processes and mechanisms is inadequate to confidently support a decision to apply dispersants, close quote. Even Bill Riley, former EPA administrator under the first President Bush and co-chair of the Presidential Commission investigating the BP oil spill, expressed concern about the use of dispersants. He said he didn't allow dispersants to be used following the Exxon Valdez accident because he was concerned about fish hatcheries in Prince William Sound. He said, quote, we didn't want the dispersants to get into the water column where the fish, would have ingested it, and that dispersant policy is something he wants the Commission to look into. The underlying bill before us will make sure that the EPA, for the first time, does a comprehensive analysis. The bill requires the EPA to conduct a new rulemaking procedure to establish baseline levels of toxicity and effectiveness that takes into account a study of the acute and chronic effects on human health and the environment. This is what the EPA should have done in the first place, and it is important that we make sure it is done moving forward. Quite simply, the EPA should determine whether or not it's safe to use these dispersants, and not just which one is the safest, but whether or not they're safe at all. But meanwhile, before we determine their safety or non-safety, dispersants should not be further used. My amendment says that no dispersants can be approved for use in response to an oil spill until the rulemaking and study mandated by the bill is completed. If these dispersants are safe, there should be no problem proving so. In the meantime, we should not use massive quantities of toxic dispersants before we know they are safe. We should not endanger the health or lives of Gulf Coast residents or recovery workers, and we should not further endanger aquatic life and the food chain. This would seem to be the purpose of Section 311D of the existing law, the Clean Water Act, and the purpose of mandating the studies that are mandated by the bill. My amendment would simply say that until that study is completed, we cannot continue to use the dispersants. It would harmonize the reforms outlined in the bill with the spirit and intent of the original statute and would seem to be consistent with the National Academy of Sciences report, which says that we do not know that these dispersants are safe. Mr. Chairman, I know you share these concerns, and I thank you for all the work you have done on this issue. This amendment will build on the improvements in the legislation and seeks to ensure that pending our knowledge that these dispersants are not unsafe and poisonous, we do not continue to use them until the study is completed. It seems the most elementary thing we can do. The first thing in the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm. I fear we are doing massive harm now. The purpose of these dispersants basically is to get the oil off the water and out of sight. We know that they don't eliminate them. We know that they push the oil down into the depths below the surface, where they are harder to skim and remove, where they get into the phytoplankton, into the fish, into the food chain, where they're concentrated for human consumption later, where they poison the coral reefs. I see no reason, none, why we should continue to massively endanger human health, the health of the residents, the health of the workers, and the health of the Gulf, of the aquatic life, of the fisheries, and of the entire ecosystem until we know what we're doing. So I urge the adoption of this amendment, which simply says, don't continue the use of dispersants till the study mandated by the bill is completed and we know what we're doing. I thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Micah.
I have the greatest respect for the gentleman, but we would respectfully oppose his amendment at this time, but be very willing to work with him and try to see what we could do. Yield back.
Mr. Nadler, in his unique, keen legal analysis of all the measures come before this committee, has thoroughly reviewed the Clean Water Act and referenced Section 311D. His keen eye found the word safely attached to Section 311D, but the word safely it's not clear whether it applies to subsections B and C. And we had a discussion before he crafted his amendment about this provision. I agree in principle, but I think that there are some features that we should further consideration, to which we should give further consideration, and I would respectfully ask the gentleman to withhold until we've had a little further discussion and bring EPA into this discussion on the language that the gentleman offers.
If the gentleman will yield.
I yield.
Well, I appreciate the chairman's appreciation and general agreement with the amendment, and I appreciate the desire for some additional discussion before it goes to the floor. I will say it is true that sections B and C of Section 311 do not reference safety, and that's part of the problem.
That's right.
They ought to. I will withdraw the amendment at this time on the assurance that we'll work to get it in before we, or something equivalent to it before we go to the floor. But I do think it is urgent, because if we simply pass a bill that mandates a study to say, is this stuff safe, which is what the bill does, and meanwhile we're pouring millions of gallons into the Gulf and into the air, because it gets in the air before we know it's safe, that's massively gambling with the ecosystem and with the lives and health of the people in the area. So I will withdraw the amendment at this time in deference to the chairman and the ranking minority members' wish for further discussion with the EPA. But bear in mind also, it's the EPA's fault that they never obeyed the law. They're the cause of this. Well,
the
BP, but
has rightly pointed out that they've never applied this language, and they should have done in other circumstances.
So I hope we won't wait for them too long in discussions.
No,
because they've caused. They're part of the cause of this problem, but I will withdraw the amendment on the assurance that we'll continue to work on it before it goes to the floor.